Tributes are pouring in from around the world tonight for Václav Havel.
I will remember him not for his political achievements, but for his personality.
A very sad day for the Czech Republic, but a fond farewell for Václav Havel.
On November 17, 1989, a student protest in Prague, Czechoslovakia began the Velvet Revolution. It was named for its peaceful protests and promotion of unity amongst the oppressed. Czechoslovakia and most of Eastern Europe had not enjoyed freedom since World War II, during which time they were occupied by the Communist Soviet Union. The fall of the Berlin Wall in early November 1989 inspired the Czechoslovakian population to change course and attempt to reform their country. Led by Czech visionary Václav Havel, the Velvet Revolution pushed for a reaction from their tyrannical government, becoming an independent nation and creating a statement about how peaceful ideals and harmony can motivate reform. In the early 20th century, the nation of Czechoslovakia thrived. Since 1867, they had been ruled by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, known as the Habsburg Empire. When the empire collapsed in 1918, at the end of World War I, several new countries were created, including Czechoslovakia, composed of the urban Czechs and the rural Slovaks. By July 1933, the fascist Nazi Party was prominent across Germany. With the Czech population being 25% German, the Nazis threatened war if the German Czechs were not represented politically. Remembering the horrors of World War I and wanting to prevent it from happening again, the Munich Conference was held in Munich, Germany, in 1938, where British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain tried to negotiate with German leader Adolf Hitler. Several European countries were represented in the agreements, however, Czechoslovakia was not. Chamberlain and other European representatives agreed Hitler's Nazi soldiers should be allowed into a portion of Czechoslovakia on the eastern border, the Sudetenland. Over the following year, the power-driven Nazis occupied more of Czechoslovakia and eventually dissolved the government. In 1939, after the Nazis invaded Poland, France and the British Empire declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. For the next 6 years, the Nazis continued to take over Eastern European countries and continued their tight reign over Poland and Czechoslovakia. The German army surrendered in 1945 when they were defeated by the Allied forces. The country of Germany and all of the Nazi-occupied countries were in ruins. At the Yalta Conference in May of 1945, the attending parties discussed possible reform in Germany and Eastern Europe.
And so the decision that's made is that the Russians will have the eastern half of Germany, the other allies will have the western half. The countries that the Russians liberate will conduct free and fair elections to determine their political fate. But it's pretty clear very rapidly after the war is over that Stalin is not going to keep his word. All of Eastern Europe is communist, and we have been totally betrayed by the Russians.
The Cold War began between the Soviet Union and the United States. As Winston Churchill said in May 1946,
"From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent."
This Iron Curtain became a common term for the line that fell across Europe, dividing countries in alliance with the United States, separated from Soviet-controlled countries. Over the next 20 years, Czechoslovakia was part of the Soviet-controlled nations referred to as the Communist Bloc countries. The Berlin Wall was constructed in Germany in 1961, symbolizing the Iron Curtain. In 1968, Alexander Dubček was elected president of Czechoslovakia and attempted reform with the Prague Spring. Unfortunately, in August of 1968, the Soviet Union invaded Prague. President Dubček was removed. However, the mindset that Dubček created continued with Václav Havel, a young playwright. He joined a group of anti-communists referred to as the Club of Committed Nonpartisans. The club was part of an underground culture formed because of harsh Soviet oppression and bans on freedom of speech. Václav Havel was a major part of this underground community. In 1975, he wrote a letter to Communist General Secretary Gustav Husak, discussing problems with the Soviet government. In 1979, Havel was arrested and jailed for 4 years, now considered an enemy of the state. However, his words sparked the beginning of revolution in Czechoslovakia. The people were beginning to see that Václav Havel could be their first spokesman for reform. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall came down, symbolizing the fall of communism. A little more than a week later, on November 17th, a ceremony was held at the Pathology Institute in Prague to commemorate Jan Palach, a student who had set himself on fire in 1968. It occurred every year amongst students and artists and was very peaceful. In 1989, hundreds of college students, actors, and musicians attended. They began to sing "We Shall Overcome," a song from the American Civil Rights Movement, in both the Czech and Slovak language. Emotion quickly rose among the crowd. The protesters were tired of Soviet oppression and rebelled. Although they weren't allowed to, they began to march towards the center of Prague. The armed police violently broke up the protest. The police's reaction to their peaceful revolt sparked the desire for revolution across the country. Early the next day, on November 18th, strikes were held across Czechoslovakia. A major figure in the strikes was the Civic Forum, which was formed in 1977 as an underground organization against communist ideals. Václav Havel had been a figure in the Civic Forum before he was arrested and emerged on November 19th to assist with the revolution. Havel once said, "Is the human word truly powerful enough to change the world and influence history?" When he emerged as a leader, this mindset created one of the essential elements of the revolution, peace, or the attempt to negotiate instead of fight. It was given the nickname the Velvet Revolution, and over the next 3 days, people of every age, nationality, and political party gathered in Prague to demand that the communists, particularly President Gustav Husak and Prime Minister Ladislav Adimek, grant them their freedom. President Husak's immediate reaction to this revolution was a plan of violence. However, due to the number of citizens involved, on November 23rd, he decided negotiation was the only solution. On November 26th, Husak sent the protesters to meet with Prime Minister Adimek. The main conflict was the strike that was going to occur the following day, November 27th, throughout large cities such as Prague, Brno, and Ostrava. The protesters insisted upon it as they believed Husak and Adimek did not comprehend Czechoslovakia's desperate need for reform. The strike began at noon. Workers walked out of factories, stores and businesses shut down, all public transportation stopped. The strike spread across the country, and Czechoslovakia as a whole stood perfectly still. In the philosophy of communism, what held up the government was the support of the working class, or the blue-collar citizens. By involving the working class, the students and artists who were leading the revolution had caused the government to collapse. The Velvet Revolution was complete. The Soviets agreed to recreate the government in favor of the Civic Forum's policies. Gustav Husak was removed as president, replaced by Václav Havel. The reform in Czechoslovakia had begun. The first attempt at reform was to install a free market economy. This would allow the value of goods to be based on supply and demand, so that the government would have less control over the national marketplace. However, as this progressed quickly, a problem arose. Slovakia was mostly responsible, in the Czechoslovakian economy, for building weaponry. Václav Havel, however, cut military spending. They insisted that the only way reform could work for them was if the Czechs and Slovaks separated, and two countries were formed in 1992. As for Eastern Europe, many other countries saw the collapse of their regimes as well. Germany was reunified after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Hungary became a republic shortly afterward, followed by Poland in January 1990. After Czechoslovakia became democratic, the Soviet Union finally fell from power on December 26, 1991. With countries under their power seceding, the Soviet Union was losing the support that held up their government, and the Velvet Revolution was the final event that caused them to collapse. Afterward, many Soviet states and nations were finally freed from communism. The Velvet Revolution stood out because it was a non-violent revolution that originated from one crucial idea: unity amongst the oppressed. In 1975, Václav Havel wrote, "There is no one in our country who is not, in a broad sense, existentially vulnerable. Everyone has something to lose, and so everyone has reason to be afraid." The people of Czechoslovakia found the strength to revolt, and through peaceful demonstrations, caused a reaction from the people around them. The unity amongst the citizens of Czechoslovakia and their agreement to remain nonviolent truly shaped the future so that reform was possible. They, and many other countries, were free to reshape their governments and truly become a part of Europe. Over time, the Velvet Revolution became an inspiration for reform and change. Through a revolution that took less than 10 days to complete, the people of Czechoslovakia were able to become two nations, separating two ethnicities that had been forced together for more than 50 years. As a reaction to the collapse of the Soviet Union, millions were freed and able to become democratic, brought together after being oppressed for more than half a century.